This guy got betrayed in the worst way possible, completely destroyed, without any mercy, and the one who did it was the very girl who made him feel special just moments ago. In this game, newbies were treated like absolute trash, ignored by everyone, and left to struggle alone without any help. And Jiwoo was one of those unlucky players who kept getting humiliated for being weak, unable to find a party no matter how hard he tried. Then suddenly, this girl appeared out of nowhere acting different, saying she didn't have a party either and that he seemed perfect, and just like that, the guy started feeling hopeful for the first time. As they walked out of the city together, she casually praised his gear and said he looked like a real knight, and that single line hit him so hard that his mind instantly ran wild, building a whole future in seconds, imagining their first kiss, a proposal, marriage, a family, even kids. Like his brain just refused to chill. But the moment they reached a quiet, isolated area outside the city, the girl really touched his heart, literally with her magic staff. As he collapsed, confused and broken, he asked why she would go that far just to steal his items, but she immediately shut him down, saying she didn't need trash loot like his and mocking him for being poor, even going as far as saying he looked like a beggar's kid with such weak gear. After completely crushing whatever pride he had left, she PK'd him like he was nothing, and said she was sick of losers, revealing that he wasn't special at all, just another number in her grind. After eliminating her 1000th newbie player, she unlocked a secret class, and became the first goddess in the game Chrono Life, and completely satisfied with herself, she walked away saying she had a mission to complete. Meanwhile, Jiwoo paid the price for losing, respawning in the nearest city while losing half his experience and power, and as he sat there remembering how everyone treated him like trash, something inside him snapped, and he decided to risk everything by trying to upgrade his weak starter items. He started with his sword but failed miserably, then switched to his gloves, hoping to compensate but failed again even worse, and after repeatedly striking with the hammer in frustration, he ended up destroying all his items, without successfully upgrading even one, basically ending his game life right there as he sat down with nothing left but frustration and tears. Then out of nowhere, a twig fell near him, just a free beginner item that most players considered useless trash and threw away without a second thought. But for some reason, his intrusive thoughts kicked in, and he decided to try upgrading it once, and surprisingly, it worked, giving it +1 extra damage. So he tried again, and it worked again, and now slightly pissed at the absurdity of it, he decided to keep upgrading this useless stick until it finally broke. By the time he landed the final hammer strike, his arm was completely drained, but instead of breaking, the stick reached the insane level of +99, turning that piece of junk into something ridiculously overpowered, and as he stood there shocked, he accidentally dropped it, and the moment it touched the ground, the game registered it as an attack, triggering a massive explosion that became the biggest destruction humanity had ever seen. So powerful, it almost split the entire planet in half. As Jiwoo stared at the aftermath in disbelief, notifications started flooding in rapidly, announcing that he had broken the record for most players eliminated in a single attack, with a total of 850,617 players wiped out instantly. And after processing what just happened, he finally understood that he now possessed the most broken power in the game, and without hesitation, he decided he would use it to get revenge on everyone who looked down on him, especially that so-called goddess girl who completely destroyed him. Jiwoo was dirt poor, barely surviving, and didn't even have money for new clothes. While walking through the street, another player suddenly bumped into him, got pissed, and started threatening him like he owned the place. Jiwoo stayed calm for a second, then casually said he asked for it, before swinging his stick without hesitation. The moment the attack landed, the player exploded instantly, and a huge chunk of the city got wiped off the map like it was nothing. People nearby froze in shock, quickly realizing Jiwoo was the one responsible for that insane destruction. He felt confident for a moment, but then a system alert popped up and ruined everything instantly. His weapon now had durability of 3 out of 5, meaning only 3 attacks remained before it completely broke. That realization hit him hard, forcing him to quickly hide inside an alley to think things through properly. He had the strongest item in the world right now, but could only use it 3 more times, which made reckless revenge pointless and honestly stupid. This time, instead of acting emotional, Jiwoo actually used his brain and came up with a smarter plan. Rather than wasting attacks on random players, he decided to become famous by defeating the strongest boss in the entire game. So, he made his way to the Valley of Death, where a terrifying roar echoed through the area, instantly setting the mood. Standing before him was Urus, the two-headed dragon, known as the strongest boss in Chrono Life. Urus tried to intimidate Jiwoo, showing off his overwhelming presence and power like a boss should. But before the dragon could even finish his dramatic speech, Jiwoo casually attacked once, instantly ripping off one of his heads and leaving him completely stunned. Everything flipped in that moment, and suddenly Urus wanted to talk things out like a reasonable creature. But Jiwoo wasn't here for conversation, especially with only 3 attacks remaining in his arsenal. He decided to finish things quickly and maximize his gains, so he struck again, leaving the dragon completely wrecked and barely holding on. Jiwoo couldn't help but feel annoyed that his insanely powerful weapon was about to disappear so soon. At that exact moment, Urus realized he still had a chance to survive, and quickly proposed a deal. Jiwoo, already losing patience, told him to stop wasting time and explain it fast. Urus then revealed the concept of ego-class weapons, explaining that when a powerful soul fuses with a weapon, it becomes one of the strongest items in the game with infinite durability. Of course, there was a catch, because nothing broken ever comes free without some condition attached. For Jiwoo to unlock that power, he needed to form a pact with the dragon, allowing Urus to live on as a soul inside the stick. Jiwoo didn't hesitate even for a second, and accepted the deal immediately, without overthinking it. Urus then fused his soul into the weapon, transforming it into something even more absurdly powerful, now classified as an ego-class item with infinite durability. Finally, Jiwoo could continue his revenge without worrying about limitations holding him back anymore. Meanwhile, back in the city, chaos was already spreading like wildfire because of what Jiwoo had done earlier. Wanted posters featuring his face were plastered everywhere across all kingdoms, offering a massive bounty of 1 billion gold for his capture, dead or alive. On top of that, multiple adventurer guilds from all over the kingdom gathered to deal with this growing threat. The 5 strongest guilds in Chronolife assembled with their elite leaders, all sharing a single mission: hunt down the player who wiped out over 850,000 players in one attack. From their perspective, Jiwoo was no longer just a player, but a global threat that had to be eliminated immediately. To lead this massive alliance, they chose the most respected warrior among them, Castle King Arden, leader of the Justice Guild. Under his command, the World Union Guild was formed, officially declaring war on Jiwoo. Completely unaware of the scale of chaos behind him, Jiwoo walked through the capital feeling oddly relaxed and satisfied. Suddenly, something popped out from his stick, startling him for a moment before it started talking. It revealed itself as Urus, now existing as a small spirit form after the pact. Jiwoo found it unexpectedly cute, though it was a shame only he could see it. But that peaceful moment didn't last long, because reality hit again pretty quickly. Jiwoo picked up something from the ground and realized it was his own wanted poster. Looking around, he noticed tens of thousands of identical posters covering every wall across the city. Meanwhile, Urus seemed oddly excited about the situation, shouting with joy like this was some kind of celebration. He said this outcome was obvious, since his Hyungnim managed to take down over 800,000 players in a single strike, something even he couldn't achieve himself. He also pointed out that the 1 billion gold bounty translated into real-world money, which made the situation even more insane. Jiwoo, slightly confused, questioned how an AI like him could casually use slang like that without breaking rules. Urus brushed it off, saying nobody cares anymore since he's technically already dead. Then he asked what Jiwoo planned to do next, pointing out that players from all over the world would soon come hunting him, even suggesting they could just wipe out humanity entirely. Jiwoo ignored that wild suggestion and instead looked at the posters again, recalling the moment he accidentally caused that massive explosion earlier. Strangely enough, he realized the feeling wasn't bad at all. It actually felt like he had become some kind of celebrity overnight. With that thought, he calmly announced that he would adopt the LHS style moving forward. Urus looked confused and asked what that even meant. Jiwoo explained that it stood for loser hiding strength, a concept where someone extremely powerful pretends to be weak. Urus questioned the logic, saying humans would just ignore him completely if he acted like a weakling. But Jiwoo simply said he didn't understand, and that this approach would make things way more fun. He added that from others' perspective, he would look like a nobody, but in reality, he would be the protagonist, enjoying everything from the shadows. He wanted to fully enjoy this fantasy life without restrictions, but right at that moment, everything went sideways instantly. Out of nowhere, an arrow struck him hard, catching him completely off guard. Urus froze in shock as Jiwoo collapsed to the ground, coughing blood while losing strength rapidly. He slowly lowered his head onto the ground as Urus hovered beside him, panicking and calling out to his Hyungnim desperately. On a rooftop nearby, Hawkeye stood watching everything unfold while holding a rare cyan-colored bow, with a quiver full of matching arrows ready behind him. Calm and confident, he called out that he had successfully hit the target, and below him, his army immediately began rushing toward Jiwoo, who still lay on the ground surrounded by danger. Within seconds, the troops of Ardan Castle closed in and completely surrounded him from all sides. Hawkeye raised his voice and declared, in the name of the Supreme Commander of the 5 Guilds Union, that this abominable man who murdered 800,000 players must be bound and thrown into jail. The soldiers roared loudly in response, fully ready to carry out his command without hesitation. Urus, growing desperate, asked if his Hyungnim was alright, and kept urging him to get up quickly. He warned that even if these humans were individually weak, things would turn bad if they all attacked together at once. Despite the arrow lodged deep in his chest, Jiwoo slowly forced himself up and stood facing the entire Ardan army without backing down. The soldiers shouted that the enemy was back on his feet, and Hawkeye immediately ordered them not to give him any time to recover, commanding a full attack right away. Urus called out again, clearly worried this time, but Jiwoo ignored the concern and calmly took back his earlier thoughts about staying low. Without hesitation, he grabbed the arrow stuck in his chest and ripped it out before throwing it to the ground in pure contempt. Tightening his grip on the staff, he muttered that he only wanted to live quietly like a background extra, but these idiots forced his hand and brought this on themselves. The moment those words settled, an overwhelming explosion of energy erupted from his body, lighting up the entire realm like a second sun had appeared. With a single swing of his staff, he unleashed power comparable to a nuclear blast, and in that instant, every soldier around him dropped lifeless to the ground, without exception. Hawkeye barely managed to survive, coughing heavily as he tried to process what had just happened. In just a blink, his entire army had been wiped out completely, leaving nothing but destruction behind. Still in shock, he realized that the capital of the First Realm itself had practically vanished from the map. Before he could even react further, Jiwoo suddenly appeared right in front of him, causing pure fear to take over his expression. As Jiwoo stepped closer, Hawkeye quickly pulled out a summoning orb from his clothes, a rare item capable of calling countless users instantly. Without wasting another second, he shattered the orb, and a massive magic circle formed beneath him as multiple portals opened across the battlefield. He shouted loudly, calling all members of the Union to respond and activate large-scale teleportation immediately. From every portal, tens of thousands of players began pouring out non-stop, quickly surrounding Jiwoo from every direction. Within moments, the battlefield filled with an overwhelming force of nearly 3 million players, all gathered for one purpose alone: to eliminate Jiwoo. Hawkeye pointed straight at him and screamed for the entire army to attack, and at his command, the massive force moved forward in perfect unison. Faced with this absurd number of enemies, Jiwoo simply let out a deep sigh like this was getting annoying. Then, without rushing, he moved his staff slightly to the side and swung once, instantly cutting down an entire row of soldiers in a single effortless motion. Everyone caught in the attack was completely annihilated without resistance. Urus watched in stunned silence as Jiwoo swung again in the opposite direction, then thrust the staff forward, wiping out another massive portion of the army like it meant nothing. The dragon couldn't believe what he was seeing, recalling how he thought Jiwoo would struggle if millions attacked together. To Urus, that was basic logic, since even he couldn't handle that many opponents at once. The World Union wasn't weak either. They were elite rankers from across the world, and even Urus believed he might lose if faced with such numbers alongside his own army. That was why retreat always seemed like the smartest option before. But now, watching Jiwoo casually erase entire sections of the army, he realized he had been completely wrong. Taking advantage of a brief opening, several soldiers from powerful lineages rushed forward together, wielding swords and spears as they leaped toward Jiwoo to strike him down. But before their attacks could even land, Jiwoo simply moved his staff slightly, and with a single touch, every one of them was instantly annihilated. Another full row of soldiers was split apart like they never stood a chance. In the background, Abracadabra, along with her assistant mages, began preparing a large-scale spell with serious focus. Jiwoo sensed the shift behind him and turned around just in time to see an enormous magic circle forming high in the sky. Abracadabra unleashed an ancient destruction enchantment, a spell powerful enough to completely disintegrate its target without leaving anything behind. A massive beam of energy shot toward Jiwoo at terrifying speed, and he simply watched it with mild surprise instead of panic. He casually remarked that the spell name actually sounded pretty cool, and figured he should name his own attacks too. Then he lifted his staff upward and swung, slicing through everything in its path as the strike extended far beyond the atmosphere itself. He named that move Arise, and just like that, the magic circle and the ancient spell were completely obliterated without any resistance. Abracadabra stood frozen, unable to understand how her strongest magic had been shattered so easily. The royal sorcerers prepared to act again, but Jiwoo moved faster. He raised his staff once more and called the next move, Attack, swinging forward and cutting through everything in front of him, sending the mages flying helplessly across the battlefield. What started as 1 against 3 million didn't just become overwhelming, it turned into a complete disaster for the World Union Guild. Every single force they had gathered was crushed beyond recovery. Hawkeye dropped to his knees, sweating heavily as fear took complete control of him, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. Before he could even process it, Jiwoo appeared right in front of him again, calm as ever. Jiwoo explained that he had intentionally spared his life earlier because controlling his power properly was still difficult, and killing him then would have been pointless. Hawkeye, trembling, asked why he was still alive. Jiwoo sighed and said the reason was obvious, reminding him that he was the one who fired the arrow earlier. Panic took over Hawkeye instantly, but before he could react further, Jiwoo struck his face with the staff, ending everything just like that. As expected, the battle quickly became a massive topic, not only among Chronolife players, but also across other games, and even among people who didn't care about gaming at all. Despite all the destruction, the stick remained completely intact, and Jiwoo casually examined it while finishing off the elf. Urus, still amazed, praised his Hyungnim as truly incredible, while Jiwoo casually mentioned he had been wondering where he disappeared earlier. Out of nowhere, someone approached from behind, and Jiwoo turned around to face a girl standing there calmly. For a second, He wondered if there were still enemies left alive after that massacre, already feeling annoyed at the thought of dealing with more trouble. But then he recognized her figure, and everything clicked instantly, freezing the moment between them. The two stood silently in the middle of a battlefield covered with destruction, staring straight at each other without moving. The goddess of life simply looked at him with a faint smile, while Jiwoo felt anger rising uncontrollably as he realized exactly who she was. No one could have expected this kind of reunion, especially not here, surrounded by the aftermath of millions dead. The plains stretched endlessly under the sunset, filled with 3 million bodies and countless broken weapons scattered everywhere, turning the entire scene into something almost unreal. Right in the middle of that chaos stood Jiwoo, facing the one person he wanted to destroy the most. He thought the whole situation felt strangely dramatic, almost like some twisted story playing out just for him. Then the memory hit him hard. The moment she mocked his parents as beggars, and his hand began trembling with pure rage. Maybe it was because his emotions had flipped completely from before, but instead of snapping immediately, he let out a laugh he couldn't control. The goddess greeted him casually, saying it had been a long time, calling him Mr. Heo like nothing had happened. She even asked how he had been, smiling as if this was some destined meeting she had been waiting for. Jiwoo shut that idea down instantly, calling it nonsense and saying he could tell just by looking at her that she had been the one hunting him all along. The goddess tilted her head slightly, amused, asking if that was really the impression she gave off. Jiwoo admitted that while he wanted nothing more than to crush her right there was still something he wanted to confirm first. Then, out of nowhere, he asked if she had dyed her hair, which seemed to genuinely please her. She happily explained that after taking his life, she had unlocked the secret class, becoming the goddess of life, and that was why her hair color had changed. Jiwoo stared at her coldly and let out a quiet sigh before raising his staff again. He pointed out that after killing 1,000 people, calling herself the goddess of life felt wrong, saying it should really be goddess of death instead. The goddess agreed without hesitation, even finding his observation amusing. Jiwoo didn't waste another second after that, slamming his staff into the ground and launching a massive blast of energy straight at her. He declared that he had heard enough of her story, and now it was time to crush her completely. The goddess casually questioned if he wasn't rushing things a bit, but the explosion had already gone off, further destroying the already ruined battlefield. Jiwoo stared at the smoke without any expression, expecting it to be over, but then her voice came through calmly, saying it was a shame since she would have liked to talk longer. Suddenly, she appeared right behind him, completely unharmed. Jiwoo spun around instantly and struck the ground again, causing another violent explosion that tore through everything in front of him. Urus shouted excitedly that the attack had definitely hit, praising it as a perfect strike. Jiwoo brushed it off, saying it was obvious since people who act gentle are usually full of crap anyway. However, as the smoke cleared, he saw her still standing there without a single scratch, watching him silently. She admitted that he had grown much stronger, but said his attack was still too weak to take her life. Urus panicked, yelling that she was still alive, while Jiwoo calmly replied that he could see that already. As they argued briefly, the goddess simply observed them with a faint smile, which suddenly made Urus freeze. He realized she was looking directly at him, something that should have been impossible since only Jiwoo was supposed to see him. Completely confused, he questioned how she could even perceive his existence. Jiwoo also found it strange, knowing his attack had definitely connected, yet she stood completely unaffected. The goddess scoffed at them both, asking if a mere human really thought he could harm a goddess. Jiwoo pretended to act surprised, resting his staff on his head as he said he was now seriously getting annoyed. Without warning, he charged at her at full speed, closing the distance instantly and triggering another massive explosion upon impact. He didn't stop there, attacking again immediately, blasting apart another section of the battlefield. His assault continued non-stop, breaking apart parts of the planet itself as shockwaves spread everywhere. Urus watched in awe, saying the entire continent was shaking, and that at this rate everything would be destroyed completely. But the goddess calmly responded that it was pointless, still smiling as she spread her wings and lifted herself into the air above Jiwoo. Urus was stunned by that sight, while Jiwoo began to sweat slightly, showing signs of exhaustion for the first time. Her wings dissolved into feathers that floated gently around her as she descended and walked toward him again. She asked what he planned to do now, saying he must have spent every day thinking about how to kill her. Then she told him to give up, claiming that no matter how strong he became or how much time passed, he would never be able to take her life. Standing right in front of him, she repeated those words confidently. Jiwoo stared at her quietly for a few seconds before closing his eyes and letting out a slow sigh. Then he turned away and took a few steps back, which made her question if he had finally given up. Instead of answering directly, he casually swung his stick in the air a few times, testing its weight and strength. He mentioned he was just checking how hard he could swing it, thinking maybe he could even snap it in half. The goddess dismissed the idea immediately, saying it wouldn't work and that killing her was impossible. But Jiwoo corrected her calmly, saying she misunderstood his intention entirely. His target was never her in the first place, it was the entire planet itself. That statement left the goddess completely stunned, unable to process what he just said. Jiwoo explained that if he couldn't kill her directly, then destroying the planet would solve the problem anyway. Either she would die in the explosion or be thrown into space with no way to survive. The goddess stared stared at him in disbelief, questioning whether a human could even achieve something that absurd. Jiwoo confirmed it without hesitation, saying he would strike with his full power this time. He even mentioned that earlier, when he caused that massive destruction, he hadn't used his full strength at all. Hearing that, the goddess's expression finally turned serious as she pointed out that destroying the planet would kill him too, turning everything into a pointless suicide instead of revenge. She asked if he would really be satisfied with that outcome. Jiwoo began laughing quietly, remembering everything he had learned about this world, where only strength mattered and nothing else held value. He told her to listen carefully, because now it was their turn to learn something important. People like her would never understand what it meant to have nothing left. Raising his staff once again, he stated clearly that no one should mess with someone who had nothing to lose. The goddess suddenly grew uneasy and told him to wait, but Jiwoo had already made his decision. He swung his stick down with all his strength, and the moment it struck the ground, everything began to shatter instantly. Both the goddess and Urus were caught in the explosion, while Jiwoo stood there with a twisted smile on his face. The entire land split apart into 6 massive fragments, dividing the planet itself before everything erupted into a supernova-level explosion. The destruction spread across the entire Chronolife universe, wiping out everything with a single full-power strike from Jiwoo. And as everything collapsed into nothingness, lines of data began scrolling across a screen. Meanwhile, in the real world, inside a facility filled with virtual reality pods, an attendant was dozing off during his shift like nothing important ever happened there. Suddenly, a player screamed in frustration after getting forcefully disconnected from Chronolife without any warning. He complained loudly, saying they hadn't even reached the final boss yet, so getting kicked out made absolutely no sense. Other players quickly joined in, confused and annoyed, asking the attendant if he had accidentally flipped the main switch, something he was clearly not supposed to touch. The employee jolted awake and tried to calm everyone down, explaining that it wasn't a power outage or any kind of circuit failure causing the issue. One young player suggested it might be a server problem with Crowley, the company behind the game. Almost immediately after, someone shouted that an official announcement had just been posted on their homepage. The notice confirmed there was a server issue with Chronolife and stated that the reopening date would be announced later. Hearing that, everyone was shocked, finding it hard to believe that such a massive game server could actually crash like this. However, something strange stood out among all the confusion. One player was still connected to the game. His pod clearly showed it was still in use, even though the servers were supposedly down. Back inside the game, a system notification appeared, displaying a synchronization process. The client updated to version 1.7 and began checking for active users. The result showed only one person still connected. Jiwoo suddenly found himself standing in an empty space, surrounded by floating streams of data, completely disconnected from everything he knew. He looked around in confusion, wondering where he had ended up, since this clearly wasn't part of the game world anymore. Everything felt off, like reality itself had glitched. Then suddenly, a mysterious voice spoke, mentioning ST-389. The voice explained that ST-389 was the name of the planet Jiwoo had just destroyed, a world known for its beauty in the 4th universe, and apparently, it was their mother's favorite place. Hearing that, Jiwoo turned toward the source of the voice. Surprised by the sudden revelation, he asked who was speaking, trying to understand what was going on. A blonde man stood there, casually telling him to shut up before suddenly smiling in a slightly unsettling way and introducing himself as God. Jiwoo just looked at him and sighed like he couldn't be bothered dealing with this nonsense. He said that if that was his identity, then it wasn't really his problem, and instead asked if he had seen a black-haired woman around here. God replied that there were only 2 of them present in that space, and to confirm it, a system screen appeared showing the number of current users as 1. He then questioned Jiwoo, asking what exactly was wrong with him. After all, Jiwoo had wiped out every living thing with that explosion, so it should have been obvious that no one else survived. Jiwoo reacted by laughing, which completely confused God for a moment. Then he burst into full laughter, shouting that his revenge was finally complete, clearly overjoyed by what he had done. For him, this was the entire reason he played the game in the first place. He called out to Urus, excited to share the moment, saying he had finally achieved his revenge. But no matter how many times he called, nothing happened, and no response came back. Jiwoo slammed his stick against his hand, trying again to call his dragon, but it was useless. God repeated that it was only the 2 of them there, so he shouldn't expect that companion to appear. Jiwoo then questioned him directly, asking whether he was some kind of NPC or the game's administrator. God calmly replied that he was neither of those things. Just as he was about to explain further, something suddenly cracked through space itself, interrupting him completely. The sound of a rift tearing open cut off his voice, and he sighed in annoyance, complaining that something was already interfering again. A bright light began to shine in the center of the room, illuminating Jiwoo's face as everything around them started to distort. God looked at him and said it was disappointing, but he was glad they met. He told Jiwoo to say hello to the little furry one before disappearing. Jiwoo tried to stop him, shouting in confusion, but the intense light blinded everything, and the figure vanished instantly. Right after that, the game server completely shut down, and Jiwoo was forcibly disconnected. Back in the real world, His capsule was the only one still active inside the room. The pod slowly opened with a hiss, revealing his real body as he removed the virtual headset from his head. Still processing everything, he muttered in frustration, wondering why that strange guy had shown up at that exact moment. He also questioned what that comment about a furry little thing even meant. But before he could think further, he noticed someone else in the room. A blonde man stood there calmly with a cigar in his mouth, staring directly at him without blinking. The man stepped forward and began reciting Jiwoo's personal details like he already knew everything. He stated his name, Lee Jiwoo, his age is 21, and mentioned that he had been playing Chrono Life for 3 months, even pointing out that his chosen weapon was the level 99 stick. Jiwoo confirmed everything, but immediately demanded to know who this guy was supposed to be. The man slowly removed his glasses, revealing a confident expression as he gave his answer without hesitation. He said he was the one who was going to take that stick from him. Mentally, Jiwoo started reviewing everything that had happened to him so far, trying to make sense of this insane situation. He was just an ordinary college student who enjoyed playing Chrono Life casually without thinking too much about it. Until recently, he was nothing more than a beginner struggling to survive like everyone else at the bottom. But somehow, through ridiculous luck, he ended up creating a level 99 stick, something no one else had ever achieved. With that absurd weapon in his hands, he crushed everyone who ever looked down on him, including the girl who betrayed him so badly. Then things got even weirder when a man claiming to be God suddenly appeared and vanished like it was nothing. And now, somehow, he found himself sitting inside a restaurant, surrounded by guards like he was some kind of criminal under watch. Food was placed neatly on the table in front of them, and while the blonde man ate like he hadn't eaten in days, Jiwoo just sat there watching, still trying to process everything. The man casually told him to eat, saying the woman running the place was an excellent cook. Jiwoo nodded slightly, agreeing without much thought, but inside his head, he was seriously wondering what the hell was even going on anymore. The blonde man continued talking, explaining that this exact Gukbap restaurant was where he used to eat often when he was completely broke. That was around 15 years ago, long before everything changed for him. He mentioned that his company had been established during the early development phase of Chrono Life, which immediately made Jiwoo start connecting the dots. As the realization slowly hit him, Jiwoo looked at the man and muttered that it couldn't be possible. The blonde man then formally introduced himself, stating that he was Choi Deokbai, the president of Chrono Life. Hearing that, Jiwoo was caught completely off guard, admitting that he had honestly thought this guy was some kind of gangster. He glanced at the guards around them and asked who they were supposed to be. Deokbai casually replied that they were company employees, including a character modeler, a sound director, and even a marketing team leader. That explanation didn't really help Jiwoo relax, and he admitted he was genuinely scared, thinking they were some kind of mob group earlier. Still confused, he asked why the president of Crowley himself would come after him personally like this. Deokbai reminded him calmly that he had already explained this back in the capsule room. He said he had come to retrieve the level 99 stick, speaking like it was the most obvious thing in the world. Hearing that directly made Jiwoo freeze for a moment, clearly not expecting things to escalate like this. Deokbai noticed his reaction and questioned why he looked so shocked. From his perspective, as a game company, it was completely natural to retrieve items that were considered bugged or abnormal. Jiwoo immediately protested, saying that he was the one who upgraded the item himself, so it wasn't some random glitch. Deokbai responded calmly, throwing out a number that completely stunned him. He said the official success rate, after enhancing an item 10 times, was only 3%, and after that point, the chances dropped even further into near impossibility. Jiwoo stood there processing that information, but still argued that if there was even a chance, then what he did shouldn't be considered a bug. Getting frustrated, he suddenly stood up from the table, clearly not ready to just hand over his weapon like that. But Deokbai simply let out a deep sigh, looking at him with a calm but firm expression before speaking again. He stated clearly that the level 99 stick would now be in his possession, leaving no room for argument. Meanwhile, back in the world of Chrono Life, near the town of Frontal, a massive monster slowly advanced across an open field, its presence alone enough to shake the ground slightly. It was a level 21 Gyros, a creature strong enough to wipe out careless parties without much effort. A group of players stood ready, shouting nervously that the monster was approaching fast. The party's mage quickly cast a fire spell, launching a blazing fireball that struck the beast directly, engulfing it in flames. The creature let out a painful roar, clearly affected by the attack. The party leader got excited seeing that the attack worked, and immediately ordered everyone to repeat the assault without giving the monster time to recover. But before they could coordinate properly, a girl named Keon suddenly rushed forward alone, screaming as she unleashed her power recklessly. The leader instantly shouted at her not to move ahead by herself, but she ignored the warning completely. As expected, things went south fast, and the monster retaliated brutally, striking her and sending her flying high into the air like she weighed nothing. She crashed straight into the group's priestess, knocking both of them down and leaving them completely incapacitated. Panic spread instantly among the remaining members, who started shouting that they were in serious trouble and needed to retreat before things got worse. Watching everything from a distance, Jiwoo stood still for a moment, clearly uninterested at first, before letting letting out a small sigh as he wondered whether he should even bother getting involved. Beside him, Urus casually ate a piece of chicken like this was just entertainment and asked what his Hyungnim planned to do next. Jiwoo thought for a moment, then picked up his stick and checked his normal stats, as if grounding himself in reality again. That action reminded him of the conversation he had earlier at the restaurant with Deokbae. The CEO had said he would take the plus 99 stick, which made Jiwoo uneasy at that time. But then Deokbae had clarified something important, saying it was the company's official stance after careful investigation. Despite Jiwoo protesting that it wasn't fair, Deokbae explained that the stick wasn't actually a bugged item. From that moment onward, the company would no longer interfere with his account in any way. Whether he defeated the strongest boss, wiped out millions of players, or even destroyed the entire planet, it would all be considered valid gameplay. Then Deokbae casually added salted vegetables into his gukbap and offered some to Jiwoo, saying that whether to add them or not was entirely up to him. Jiwoo had taken the plate and stood up, but before anything else could happen, the old lady running the restaurant smacked Deokbae on the head. She scolded him harshly for ruining the gukbap, complaining that she spent all night preparing the broth properly only for him to mess it up like that. Watching that chaotic moment, Jiwoo had quietly lowered the plate of vegetables. Back in the present, Jiwoo stared at his stick while thinking about that oddly specific memory involving salted vegetable soup. His thoughts, however, were interrupted by the nearby party leader, loudly cursing in frustration. The man complained about how useless Kion was, saying she didn't even understand basic positioning, which was essential for party hunting. According to him, she was acting like a complete troll, and because of her, they had to hold back their entire hunt. He went on ranting that everything was ruined just because she joined their party in the first place. Hearing that, Jiwoo remembered something Deokbae had asked of him before leaving. He had said that even if it sounded strange, chronolife was meant to be enjoyed, offering freedom, romance, and adventure in a vast fantasy world. So, instead of destroying everything, Jiwoo should just relax and enjoy the experience in his own way. Jiwoo reflected on those words for a moment, but suddenly, the situation escalated again. The party leader spat directly at Kion, hitting her scarf without any hesitation, and told her to get lost. He declared he wouldn't hunt with someone like her and turned away, disgusted that they were even using the same gear as her. Just like that, Kion was kicked out of the party without a second thought. Jiwoo watched the entire scene and sighed again, thinking that this kind of behavior was expected in a world ruled by the law of the jungle. Still, remembering Deokbae's words, he decided he would enjoy the game in his own way from now on. With that mindset, he raised his staff and unleashed a blast of energy toward the group of adventurers, but suddenly stopped midway when he heard someone screaming loudly behind him. Jiwoo turned his head to look, slightly surprised by the interruption. Kion was shouting in frustration, saying this game was the shit and that everyone could go to hell. She ranted that those idiots had no eye for quality and should at least recognize how good her weapon was, especially since she spent a lot of money buying that sword. Jiwoo watched her closely, caught off guard by how familiar those words sounded. It reminded him of himself from before, when he said similar things about his own weapon, and how others had looked at him like he was crazy. Kion kept going, declaring that she didn't need anyone and wouldn't join any party again. She would hunt alone from now on, no matter what happened. Hearing that, Jiwoo fell into thought again, realizing that even now, he wasn't entirely sure what he should think about everything anymore. Just then, Kion suddenly heard a monster's growl echo right in front of her, snapping her out of frustration instantly. When she looked up, her expression froze as she realized she wasn't facing just one creature, but was completely surrounded by multiple monsters closing in from every direction. The beasts opened their jaws, roared loudly, and rushed toward her all at once, leaving her no space to escape. Panic took over as they got closer, and she tried to defend herself, even though she clearly knew it wouldn't be enough. Before the attacks could land, Jiwoo suddenly appeared right in front of her without warning, almost like he teleported into position. Even as he moved, he questioned himself internally, wondering why he had even decided to step in. Without wasting another second, he swung his staff, releasing a devastating attack that wiped out everything in its path instantly. The monsters didn't even get a chance to react, as they were completely annihilated, leaving nothing but dust behind. As the smoke slowly cleared, Kion, who had been shielding her head in fear, cautiously opened her eyes and came face to face with Jiwoo standing right there. Behind him, the sky looked perfectly clear, not a single cloud in sight, almost like the destruction never even happened. Jiwoo thought about his actions, wondering if he helped her out of sympathy or some sense of shared struggle, but quickly dismissed both ideas. In the end, he concluded he did it simply because it seemed fun at that moment. With that thought, he gave her a small smile, which only made things more confusing for her. He then walked closer, thinking that the whole situation was messy and chaotic anyway, like the beginning of something unpredictable. In his mind, this felt like the prologue to a larger story. So, casually, he asked if they could hunt together from now on. Kion immediately shut him down, telling him to get lost and making it clear she didn't hunt with newbies. Without even looking back, she turned and walked away, spitting on the ground like she had already lost patience. Jiwoo stood there confused, realizing that his first attempt at starting something new had completely flopped. Meanwhile, back in the real world, inside the city of Seoul, people continued living their daily lives, but their attention was glued to their phones. A massive event had taken over global discussions, something now being called Judgment Day by players everywhere. Debates were raging across the gaming community as everyone tried to figure out who the mysterious player was who had wiped out over 800,000 people. Some believed he had to be a battle god, the strongest existence in Chrono Life, someone completely beyond normal players. Others dismissed the idea entirely, arguing that it was impossible and must be some kind of bug or a disgusting hacker abusing the system. That opinion gained traction, since defeating 3 million players logically didn't make any sense under normal gameplay mechanics. Numbers like that couldn't be overcome with stats or skill alone, no matter how good someone was. The community grew louder, demanding justice and calling for the supposed hacker to be banned permanently. Everyone waited anxiously for an official response from the Chrono Life developers. Eventually, the announcement came, and it immediately shocked everyone. The company stated clearly that the player in question was completely normal, not a hacker, and not exploiting any bugs. That single statement flipped the entire narrative, leaving people speechless as the controversy slowly died down. Still, conversations about the incident continued everywhere, especially on the streets, where people discussed how one player had caused the server to crash entirely. They wondered what kind of person he was in real life, since his identity remained hidden behind a hood in the only image released. Back in the game, Jiwoo walked quietly behind Keon, a faint smile on his face as he followed her without saying anything. The only sound between them was the steady rhythm of their footsteps. Eventually, Keon stopped abruptly, clearly annoyed, and turned around to confront him directly. She demanded to know why he kept following her around like that. Jiwoo calmly suggested again that they should form a hunting party together. Keon immediately pushed back, asking when she had ever agreed to something like that, and told him to go hunt with someone just as poor and indecent as him. Jiwoo didn't even understand what she meant by that insult at first. She pointed directly at his clothes, explaining that he was basically wearing nothing but underwear under his cloak and carrying a level 1 stick, something only complete beginners used. According to her, she didn't have time to babysit a noob and told him to get lost again. Jiwoo stood there processing her words, slightly annoyed, thinking she called him indecent even after he just saved her life. Inside his mind, Urus commented that he had seen everything clearly, including the fact that her eyes were closed when Jiwoo saved her. That realization hit Jiwoo immediately, making everything make sense. She had no idea how strong he actually was. A slow smile formed on his face as a new idea started building in his mind. He decided it might be more interesting to hide his power for a while, instead of revealing everything immediately. Acting on that thought, he quickly ran after her and called out loudly. He asked her to carry him, completely changing his tone. Keon turned back, confused by the sudden shift, while Jiwoo explained that he didn't know anything about the game and was just a clueless newbie. He even addressed her as master, asking her to guide him properly. That single word triggered something in her instantly. She remembered how her previous party leader had looked down on her, and being called master now made her visibly excited, even if she tried to hide it. Urus questioned what his Hyungnim was even doing, but Jiwoo quietly explained that he was pretending to be weak as the first step of his plan. The dragon recalled that idea from earlier, realizing Jiwoo was now fully committing to it. Keon cleared her throat, trying to act composed, though she was clearly enjoying the situation. She said it was a bit embarrassing, but as someone experienced, she should help beginners like him. Finally, she agreed to let him join her party, declaring that this expert would guide him, but only this one time. In reality, Keon was a level 24 fighter who had invested everything into strength, completely ignoring her other stats, which honestly explained a lot about her reckless fighting style. Near the starting town, right at the dungeon entrance, Keon rushed forward without hesitation, charging straight at a screaming creature like she had something to prove. She threw a powerful punch that landed cleanly, making the level 4 rabbit bear cough up blood as its body flew backward from the impact. Without wasting even a second, another monster tried to ambush her from behind, but she reacted instantly, dodging it with a quick and agile leap. She exhaled sharply midair and flipped gracefully before coming down with a brutal kick. The rabbit bear looked up in shock, only to get crushed by her fallen dragon's stomp, slamming it hard into the ground. The remaining rabbit bears hesitated for a moment, confused by her overwhelming offense, but quickly regrouped and surrounded her from all sides. Keon didn't back down at all, holding her stance confidently and taunting them, telling them to come at her all at once like she owned the place. Meanwhile, Jiwoo just sat on the floor nearby, casually watching everything unfold like it was some live show. He admitted to himself that she was actually a pretty solid fighter, which honestly wasn't something he expected at first. Urus agreed immediately, praising her skill, but Jiwoo pointed out that even low-level monsters could become dangerous when they attacked in large numbers like that. Urus dismissed the concern, saying there was nothing to worry about since that human had extremely high-end equipment backing her up. He casually mentioned that her weapon alone was worth around 10 million gold, which made Jiwoo shout in shock, translating that into real-world money instantly. Urus continued, adding that all her gear combined was easily worth around 100 million, making the situation even more ridiculous. Jiwoo couldn't wrap his head around it, wondering how someone at her level could afford such expensive gear. That's when Urus revealed the obvious answer. She was a pay-to-win player who had spent heavily on the game. Jiwoo recalled her earlier rant about how others couldn't recognize the quality of her items, realizing she wasn't exaggerating at all. Still, he couldn't understand why anyone would spend that much money on a game in the first place. Right then, Kion turned toward him and shouted that even if she was carrying him, he shouldn't just sit there doing nothing like dead weight. Jiwoo blinked in confusion as she continued yelling, saying he needed to fight for himself if he wanted to get stronger and faster instead of acting like a useless burden. While she kept scolding him, a rabbit bear silently moved in from behind, ready to strike her. Completely unaware of the danger, she continued her lecture about how his attitude showed he had no will to improve. Jiwoo didn't even react dramatically. He simply reached out and tapped the monster lightly with his stick. The creature vanished instantly, erased without leaving even a trace behind. Kion paused mid-sentence and looked to the side, confused by what just happened. She wondered why there was suddenly a strange gust of wind inside the dungeon, clearly failing to connect the dots. Jiwoo, on the other hand, realized he might have messed up since he had no idea how to properly hide his power yet. At that moment, a message notification popped up for Kion, interrupting everything. She read it quickly, and her expression changed as she let out a deep sigh. She told Jiwoo she needed to log off for a bit and would be back in about 30 minutes. Casually telling him to keep hunting monsters while she was gone. Jiwoo just stood there, confused by how casually she decided to leave mid-hunt like it was no big deal. He wondered what kind of life she lived outside the game to casually spend 100 million on it. Urus didn't have a clear answer either, but guessed she was probably born into wealth and never had to worry about money. The scene shifted to the real world, revealing a luxurious building that clearly matched that kind of lifestyle. Inside one of the rooms, Kion was lying on her bed with a virtual reality headset on. She disconnected from Chrono Life, removed the device, and let out a quiet sigh while staring at it thoughtfully. A small smile appeared on her face as she recalled Jiwoo and their strange interaction. Suddenly, the door slammed open, and her producer stormed inside, yelling angrily and asking if she had completely lost her mind. The producer went off, complaining that she was still playing games instead of preparing, acting like she had decided to quit her job entirely. Kion snapped back, saying she had just taken off the headset and telling her to open her eyes properly, only to be called a game addict in return. The producer didn't calm down, ordering her to hurry up and sit down since they had less than 10 minutes left before going live. She scolded her again for wearing glasses under the headset, reminding her that it would leave marks on her face. Kion argued that she felt anxious without them, and could easily cover any marks with makeup. The producer gave her a cold stare before sighing in frustration, muttering that dealing with her was a complete headache, but still pushing her to get ready quickly. She even joked that if not for the money, she would have lost her patience completely by now. Makeup was quickly set up on the table, and the producer removed Kion's glasses before preparing her appearance at full speed. Kion loosened her hair, letting it fall naturally, as everything shifted into professional mode. Soon after, on a brightly lit music show stage, the host excitedly thanked the audience for waiting and announced the final performance of Music Bank. The performer had held first place for 13 consecutive weeks, making her the most popular idol at the moment. The host introduced her proudly as Han Sarang. She stepped forward and began singing a song about her first love, captivating the audience instantly. After finishing, she greeted everyone warmly and introduced herself properly. Han Sarang, a 17-year-old idol, singer, and songwriter, admired by millions. And behind all that fame, something no one knew. Her hidden hobby was playing online games. Back in the dungeon, the rabbit bears charged straight toward Jiwoo, closing in like they had found an easy target. Jiwoo stayed calm and muttered that he needed to practice a bit before she returned, clearly not planning to go all out this time. Urus, curious as always, asked what kind of practice he was even talking about now. Jiwoo replied that if he truly wanted to hide his power, he had to learn proper control. In simple terms, he was going to attack without killing anything, which honestly sounded harder than blowing everything up. As that thought lingered, an image of a massive explosion stretched across the planet itself, like a reminder of what he was capable of. Somewhere beyond, a divine being watched that scene with a faint smile, commenting that attacking without killing actually sounded pretty entertaining. He turned toward a motherly figure beside him, with an enormous sun-like presence behind her, asking if she agreed with that idea. Meanwhile, in the real world, Han Sarang continued living her double life as both a top idol and a hidden gamer. She was still just a second-year high school student, yet she had already gone through a rough start in the music industry before rising to become the most popular singer-songwriter of her time. During an interview, a journalist congratulated her for achieving first place 14 times in a row, clearly impressed by her success. He mentioned how much he loved the emotional lyrics of her debut song, which was inspired by The Little Mermaid, and asked how she managed to write something so touching. Sarang replied calmly that she liked staying home alone, reading poetry collections and sometimes even fairy tales to inspire herself. The journalist connected the dots, saying that must be why her song had such a unique title, and Sarang added that her producer told her not to mention the fairy tale inspiration since it might seem childish or embarrassing. That answer charmed both the interviewer and the audience instantly, making her seem even more genuine and likable. Watching from a distance, however, her producer just sighed in frustration, muttering that she was fooling the entire country with that act. According to her, it was all nonsense, since Sarang's real hobby wasn't reading fairy tales at all, it was playing games obsessively. Back in the interview, the host shifted topics and mentioned that Sarang was also gaining popularity as an actress, especially after her recent role as a bratty high school girl. Sarang confirmed it, saying she struggled with that role because she had never cursed in her life before, but ironically, inside the game, she was the complete opposite, throwing insults around without holding back. Back in Chrono Life, she was already yelling at Jiwoo, calling him a damn bastard and scolding him for not greeting her properly after she returned. Jiwoo looked completely confused, asking since when she became his master, but Sarang immediately declared that it started from now on without any discussion. She challenged him, asking if he had a problem with it, or if he didn't want to be carried anymore. Jiwoo quickly denied it, realizing arguing would only make things worse. For Sarang, the game was her way of releasing stress from her real-life pressures, and she clearly enjoyed acting like this inside it. Urus, on the other hand, suggested that Jiwoo should just get rid of such a rude person, but Jiwoo reminded him that he needed to hide his strength and continue acting like a weak player. Sarang then ordered Jiwoo to repeat after her, forcing him to say, "Lovely master," multiple times like it was some kind of ritual. Jiwoo reluctantly went along with it, while Urus silently thought that this whole disguise plan was working a bit too well. As they walked toward the dungeon again, Sarang suddenly stopped and asked if he had practiced a lot while hunting monsters earlier. Jiwoo let out a quiet sigh and explained that what he was doing required extreme patience, and he was still far from mastering it. Urus loudly complained that attacking without dealing damage was completely pointless, but Jiwoo quickly shut him up before he ruined everything. Sarang laughed at their interaction, calling him a strange newbie, and saying she was actually starting to enjoy this. Then she realized she still didn't know his name and casually asked what his character name was. Jiwoo was caught off guard, thinking he had already told her before, and tried to answer properly. But before he could even finish, she cut him off and decided she would just call him Underpants instead. She said it suited him perfectly, completely ignoring his actual name, which honestly just made things worse. Jiwoo stood there, frustrated, wondering why she even bothered asking for his name if she was going to rename him something ridiculous anyway. Meanwhile, from a distance, a group of people quietly observed Jiwoo and Sarang without revealing themselves. A bearded man narrowed his eyes and said he had finally found her, clearly recognizing Sarang instantly. One of his subordinates asked what their next move should be, and the leader replied calmly that they would gather all guild members inside this dungeon. Today, they weren't leaving quietly, they had come to demand justice. Further ahead, a level 22 rabbit bear slowly rose and approached Sarang aggressively, setting the stage for another fight. She casually ordered Underpants to go handle it, and Jiwoo obeyed without resistance, walking toward the monster while screaming like he had no idea what he was doing. His acting was so convincing that he genuinely looked like a clueless idiot approaching certain death. As he got closer, he carefully extended his staff and lightly touched a single strand of fur on the creature's body. Instantly, the rabbit bear took massive damage, its head crushed violently as its body collapsed to the ground. Despite that, its HP didn't drop to zero, stopping with just a sliver of health left. Jiwoo felt relieved, realizing his plan of attacking without killing had actually worked perfectly. Sarang cheered from behind, saying he managed to defeat the monster in one try and had gotten stronger already. But right at that moment, a dagger flew toward her from the shadows. She reacted instantly, sensing the danger, grabbing Jiwoo by his shirt and pulling him away while deflecting the blade with a sharp kick. The bearded man caught the dagger mid-air, his expression twisted as he commented that her reaction speed was impressive, though he credited it more to her expensive gear. Sarang demanded to know who he was, and the man, known as Mr. Kim, pretended to sound hurt, asking if she had already forgotten his voice. He then revealed that everyone present belonged to the Halasan Guild. Hearing that name, Sarang repeated it with clear disdain, already knowing what this was about. Kim laughed and said it had been a while before asking what she was plotting this time. Without waiting for an answer, he ordered his subordinates to attack immediately. Sarang quickly warned Jiwoo to stay back since things were about to get dangerous, then shifted into a fighting stance without hesitation. The assassins rushed forward together, but she countered instantly, landing a powerful kick that knocked one of them out cold with blood flying. Using his falling body as a foothold, she leaped into the air and executed a perfect flip. She shouted the name of her skill, Fallen Dragon Stomp, slamming into the ground and sending all the attackers flying away from the impact. Their leader shouted for everyone to attack together, trying to overwhelm her with numbers. Watching from the side, Jiwoo asked what was even going on, and Urus admitted he had no clue. Jiwoo, however, quickly pieced things together, concluding that the Halasan Guild had clashed with Sarang multiple times before and kept losing every encounter. This was clearly another attempt at revenge, proving that their leader didn't know when to give up. He also noted how weak they were overall, with a group around level 20 getting completely dominated by her alone, something Urus agreed with. As the fight continued, Kim quietly commented that everything was going according to plan, revealing there was more to this attack than it seemed. While Sarang remained focused on the front lines, he signaled another member to act. A new figure suddenly vanished from her position and reappeared behind Sarang in an instant, aiming sharp claws at her back. Sarang turned just in time, and noticed her opponent had no visible weapon, identifying her as a fighter-type class. But before she could react properly, the woman activated a skill called Steal. A bright flash filled the area, blinding Sarang momentarily, and when her vision returned, her battle fists had completely disappeared. The thief admired the stolen weapon, saying it was incredibly valuable and joking that Sarang must have been born rich to own such gear. Jiwoo asked what kind of skill that was, and Urus explained it was a rogue class ability called Steal, though he found it strange since it wasn't supposed to be that powerful. Jiwoo shrugged it off at first, saying it didn't matter since he had nothing worth stealing anyway. Then suddenly, he remembered his stick, and his expression changed instantly. Panic hit him hard as he glanced to the side with a forced smile before immediately turning and running away in fear. Kim noticed him briefly, and commented that there had been another person there, but dismissed him as a useless rookie with nothing of value. As Jiwoo tried to escape, the thief became more interested, tossing the stolen fists to Kim and saying that stealing from someone with nothing could be even more fun. In the next second, she appeared right in front of Jiwoo, calling him darling, and asking where he thought he was going. Jiwoo froze for a moment, realizing this was no longer the time to keep pretending. He grabbed his staff and attempted a quick attack, but to his shock, nothing happened at all. Everyone stood stunned as the smoke cleared, revealing Jiwoo completely empty-handed. His weapon was gone. The thief smiled, and casually informed him that the stick now belonged to her, causing Jiwoo to break into a cold sweat. She even threatened to take his hood next, saying that aside from his underwear, he would be left completely exposed. At that moment, a shadow suddenly fell over her face, making her hesitate. She looked up and saw something terrifying, the true form of Urus staring directly at her. The entity demanded to know how a mere mortal dared to wield him without understanding what he truly was. The overwhelming presence made the thief collapse to the ground in fear, instantly dropping the stick near Jiwoo. He quickly picked it back up, as the system announced that Urus's soul rejected the enemy and recognized Jiwoo as its true owner. Urus partially emerged from the weapon, declaring that no one had the right to possess him except his Hyungnim. It was clear the thief had completely misjudged the situation and overestimated her ability. Jiwoo casually reached out and patted the dragon's head, which made Urus visibly embarrassed despite his earlier dominance. The thief, still trembling, backed away slowly, unable to comprehend what she had just experienced. She questioned whether that was a ghost, but quickly realized it felt far too real to be something like that. Kim, irritated, asked what was wrong with her, and whether she had forgotten her role. She forced herself back up, regaining composure, and replied that she would never forget. After all, she was a professional mercenary who only cared about money and nothing else. At that moment, Sarang rushed in from the side, shouting angrily as she aimed a kick straight at the thief, demanding her weapon back without holding anything back. The thief reacted quickly, dodging the attack with ease, while commenting that the sudden assault actually caught her off guard. Still, she calmly pointed out that Sarang was chasing the wrong person, saying the weapon was somewhere else entirely. Watching everything unfold, Kim clenched his fists with a satisfied smile, clearly enjoying how things were playing out. Sarang, already furious, called them bastards and swore she would take all their lives, but before she could continue, her body suddenly gave out. She collapsed mid-action, fainting instantly after Jiwoo lightly touched her. Jiwoo calmly explained that this was his technique, strike without killing, making it sound like something completely normal. The thief stared at him in confusion, asking what he was even doing since it looked like the two of them were supposed to be on the same side. Jiwoo simply replied that he had been hiding his power this entire time. She questioned what nonsense he was talking about, but before she could process anything further, Jiwoo unleashed a burst of force that instantly overwhelmed the battlefield. In a single moment, every assassin present was completely defeated without resistance. The sheer difference in power left the thief completely stunned as she tried to understand what had just happened. She looked at him in disbelief and asked if he was the one who did all of this. Jiwoo casually tapped her on the head with his stick and confirmed it without hesitation. Her health dropped to a single bar instantly, leaving her barely standing. Without wasting time, Jiwoo used his strike without killing technique again, making sure she wouldn't die. He spoke calmly, saying he had gone through a lot of shit, which made him mentally stronger over time. But just moments ago, because of her interference, he almost had a heart attack trying to move his stick properly. As he spoke, his power surged again, releasing a wave of destruction that shook the surroundings completely. Later, Sarang slowly regained consciousness, waking up on the ground in an open field with a confused expression. She sat up quickly, startled by her surroundings and unsure how she ended up there. From behind a nearby tree, Jiwoo called out to her, asking if she was finally awake. She turned toward his voice, surprised, and immediately called him Panty Boy while demanding to know where they were and what happened to the attackers. Jiwoo replied calmly that they were near the dungeon and that the enemies had already left the area. Sarang didn't understand, questioning why she had suddenly fainted in the first place. As she spoke, she noticed something in her hands and froze for a moment. Her battle fists had returned, which clearly confused her even more. Jiwoo used the moment to ask about the Halasan Guild, wanting to know who they were, what they did, and why they were targeting her specifically. Sarang blushed slightly at his sudden concern, wondering why he was acting so nice, and even joking if he wanted to go to hell. But after a moment, she sighed and smiled faintly, deciding to explain everything since he got dragged into the situation because of her. She asked if he had ever heard of the term pay to win. Jiwoo admitted he didn't know what that meant, while Urus quickly stepped in to explain it as a common term in online games. Jiwoo immediately questioned how he even knew that, considering he was supposed to be just a game NPC, and Urus casually replied that he had looked it up on Wikipedia. He started explaining it word for word like a lecture, but Sarang cut him off midway and simplified it. She explained that it basically referred to players who spent ridiculous amounts of money in games to gain advantages. Jiwoo asked if she was referring to the Halasan Guild, and she confirmed it, saying every member there fit that description perfectly. She went on to explain that a few months ago, she had managed to buy her current weapon at an auction by pure chance. After that, the Halasan Guild started targeting her, trying to hunt her down repeatedly just to steal those fists. However, she pointed out that despite their money, they were nothing but old thugs with poor combat skills, which was why she had managed to win every encounter against them so far. Then she turned back to Jiwoo and asked how he managed to get her weapon back, wondering if he had stolen it from them somehow. Jiwoo casually replied that they simply left the fists behind and ran away, as if they had forgotten them. Sarang frowned, clearly not convinced, and said she didn't know what exactly happened, but she was certain they would come after her again since that old man's obsession wasn't normal at all. Jiwoo thought about it for a moment and said something about the situation felt off. He pointed out that it didn't make sense for people who spent billions to be so obsessed over a weapon worth 10 million gold. From his perspective, there had to be something more going on behind the scenes. Later, inside the Halasan Guild's hideout, the atmosphere turned brutal as Kim's blood splattered across the floor, his body collapsing right in front of his leader. He begged desperately for another chance, apologizing over and over, but the leader shut him down instantly, calling all of them useless without hesitation. He declared that there was no time left to waste, and that the mission would now be handed over to the 4 Heavenly Kings. Kim weakly glanced to the side as 3 figures stepped forward and stood before the leader with calm confidence. The 2nd Heavenly King scoffed, saying it made no sense for someone like Kim to be in the same division as them when he only had a net worth of 100 million gold. The 3rd King added that they had already suggested kicking little Kim out earlier, but the problem was that their Hyungnim was too soft-hearted to make that call. The 1st King remained silent, observing everything without comment. Then the 2nd King knelt beside Kim, coldly stating that relying on a hired mercenary was a pathetic strategy, which was exactly why he failed. Before things could escalate further, the 1st King intervened, saying they should leave everything to him now. He brushed his hair back casually and mentioned that the silencing fist, whatever its true nature was, would activate within 12 hours. Hearing that, their leader suddenly burst into loud, almost absurd laughter, clearly pleased with how things were unfolding. He proudly declared that it felt great being called Lord King, with a total wealth of 12 billion behind him. With that arrogance, he ordered his subordinates to show the world the true terror of the Halasan Guild, announcing that their so-called blood festival had officially begun. But right in the middle of that dramatic moment, Jiwoo suddenly appeared inside their base, casually scratching his nose like he had just walked into the wrong room. Everyone froze, staring at him in complete confusion, unable to process how he even got there. Jiwoo broke the silence first, scoffing at them for acting like a bunch of kids celebrating something as ridiculous as a blood festival. He openly mocked the 4 Heavenly Kings, treating their titles like a joke, which immediately irritated the leader. The man demanded to know who he was and how he got inside, but Jiwoo simply told them to figure it out themselves, casually picking his nose again like he didn't care at all. He muttered that it was getting harder to keep hiding his strength and pretending to be weak if these idiots kept targeting Sarang. Then he started laughing again, making fun of their titles one more time before declaring that he would end everything right there without dragging it out any longer. The leader let out an annoyed sigh, calling him a crazy bastard before ordering everyone to kill him immediately. The guild members rushed forward all at once, unleashing their strongest attacks as they closed in at incredible speed. Jiwoo, however, didn't even flinch, standing there with a relaxed smile on his face. With a single casual swing of his staff, he released a devastating wave of power that wiped out every attacker instantly. Just like that, they were defeated by what looked like nothing more than a simple twig. At the same time, outside the building, a girl approached while humming softly to herself, completely unaware of the chaos inside. Back in the hideout, the 1st Heavenly King charged forward personally, but Jiwoo defeated him with one effortless strike, sending him crashing back while coughing blood. Then suddenly, a massive explosion tore through the structure, splitting the entire house into 2 halves. The girl outside, who was none other than the goddess of life, paused for a moment in surprise, before a smile spread across her face as she recognized who was responsible. Inside, the leader panicked and ordered every remaining guild member to attack Jiwoo all at once. hoping numbers would make a difference. Facing yet another wave of enemies, Jiwoo simply sighed again and tightened his grip on the staff. He casually remarked that if they really wanted to take his life, they should at least bring 3 million people, otherwise it wasn't even worth his time. With that, he swung his staff forward, striking one assassin directly, and triggering an explosion that shot high into the sky. Without stopping, he swung again to the side, wiping out everyone in that direction instantly. The leader watched in horror, his expression turning grim as fear completely took over. As he struggled to stand, Kim desperately called out to him, telling him to run before he was completely annihilated. But the leader didn't move, realizing something far worse. He thought about the strength of his guild, knowing that aside from himself and a few core members, everyone else was a heavy spender. Even the weakest recruits had invested at least 10 million into their characters. Normally, not even the top 5 guilds would underestimate them, but standing there now, none of that mattered anymore. He couldn't understand who this man was or how he could do something so overwhelmingly impossible. Then it hit him, a terrifying realization forming in his mind. This had to be the same player from the rumors, the one who wiped out hundreds of thousands alone. As he stared at Jiwoo in fear, his mouth hung open, finally connecting everything to the infamous stick-wielding player people had been talking about. His mind drifted for a moment, recalling his own past. He had started gaming when he was just a child, back when games were simple and leveling up was slow but meaningful. He remembered playing secretly at night, getting scolded by his parents, and enjoying those moments with his friends. As time passed, life changed, responsibilities took over, and he became someone entirely different. Now in his 40s, known as CEO Wong, he lived a busy life, with no time for nostalgia. Sitting in his pristine office, a subordinate approached him, addressing him as Hyungnim and bringing an old monitor he had requested. Wong explained that he wanted to give himself something special, a reminder of the past he had worked so hard to leave behind. The subordinate questioned why he needed such outdated equipment when modern systems were available, but Wong simply replied that it was about the feeling. As he looked at the old setup, his heart raced like he had gone back in time, like meeting his first love again after years. But then, reality hit him hard as he clenched his teeth. He realized that while he had changed over time, the world around him hadn't stayed the same either, and neither had the games he once loved. Jiwoo swung his staff again, striking another subordinate and sending the man crashing hard into the ground as the entire area trembled from the impact. The king stood frozen, his body shaking uncontrollably as he watched everything collapse around him, unable to process what he was seeing. Jiwoo calmly remarked that it was almost over now, with only the two of them left to deal with. The king said nothing, as Jiwoo slowly approached, his presence alone enough to crush whatever confidence remained. This was the end for the pay-to-win players, the kind who relied on money instead of skill. Jiwoo questioned why they even bothered stealing other players' gear when they already had everything, especially men who claimed to be noble. To him, it just meant the old man in front of him deserved a proper beating. As Jiwoo closed in, Wong's mind drifted back to his past, remembering the moment he sat in front of his computer, confirming a payment of 12 billion won without hesitation. He repeated to himself that he wasn't the only one who had changed over time. In this era, effort didn't matter anymore. With enough money and a few clicks, anyone could become powerful, while those who didn't spend were left behind to suffer. That was the reality of modern gaming. Pay to win had taken over everything. Wong stood up from his chair back then, continuing to search through countless games, but they all felt the same. Then he found Chrono Life, the most acclaimed game, hoping to rediscover something he had lost long ago, something from his childhood, something real. Before that thought could settle, Jiwoo's stick struck his head directly, ending the moment. Using his strike without killing technique, Jiwoo dropped Wong to the ground without finishing him off completely. Wong coughed up blood as he fell, defeated, while Kim tried to call out to his Hyungnim in desperation. Jiwoo declared that from that moment onward, the Halasan Guild was finished for good. He added that it was too much of a hassle, so they should stop bothering Sarang entirely. With that, he turned away, saying they would never meet again, and began to leave without looking back. Wong struggled to lift himself from the ground, questioning if Jiwoo was truly the same person from the rumors, the one who had defeated the 5 major guilds and wiped out millions of players. Jiwoo paused briefly and glanced back without saying a word, confirming everything silently. Wong suddenly laughed, asking how much money Jiwoo had spent to reach that level of strength, assuming it had to be tens or even hundreds of billions of won. He believed that kind of power could only come from extreme spending. Jiwoo responded bluntly that he had no idea what he was talking about, but admitted he had spent some money too. Wong leaned forward slightly, expecting an absurd number, but Jiwoo casually replied that he only spent 55,000 won on a starter pack. That answer completely stunned Wong, leaving him speechless as Jiwoo walked away like it meant nothing. A strange smile spread across Wong's face as he repeated that number to himself, 55,000 won. Memories of his childhood came rushing back, remembering the days he played Ragnarok with pure enjoyment. Then suddenly, he burst into laughter, loud and uncontrollable, leaving Kim confused as he watched his leader lose himself in that moment. Wong asked how many games they had tried after Ragnarok, and Kim replied that it had probably been around 8. Wong kept laughing, saying that this game was truly fun, that Chrono Life was something special. At that moment, a voice confirmed his words, as the goddess of life appeared calmly inside the ruined hideout. She greeted the remaining members of the Halasan Guild, commenting on how beautiful the night was while glancing around at the destroyed base. She noted that it had been a while since she last visited, but the place was now in terrible condition. Turning toward Wong, she asked if the preparations they discussed had been completed. Wong replied that everything was progressing well, but she interrupted him, questioning why he was suddenly dwelling on the past instead. Wong then stated that he was done with everything, saying their agreement to cooperate ended right there. For a brief moment, the goddess looked surprised, but that expression quickly turned into a calm smile. Without hesitation, she swung her scepter through the air, cutting him down instantly. Kim watched in horror as Wong's body split in two and collapsed lifelessly. Kim tried to scream his boss's name, calling out desperately, but the goddess walked forward without any emotion. She casually remarked that she could have asked why he made that decision, but since she wasn't in the mood, it didn't really matter. Then she drove her staff straight into Kim's back, causing blood to splash across her face as he cried out in pain. He tried to move, but it was pointless, as she finished him off without hesitation. Standing there, she watched the aftermath with a faint smile, recalling the words Jiwoo had said earlier. As that memory lingered, her hair slowly shifted back to black once again. Meanwhile, far away, Jiwoo received a system notification announcing that he had completely annihilated the Halasan Guild. His combat experience was calculated instantly, pushing his level all the way up to 999. Jiwoo froze in confusion as the system declared that he had reached the maximum level possible. He muttered in disbelief, asking what the hell that even meant. Urus asked what happened, and Jiwoo replied that the system was saying he had hit max level. Still confused, Jiwoo opened his status window to check for himself. His class was still listed as novice, but his level had reached 999, with nearly 5,000 unallocated stat points waiting. Both Jiwoo and Urus stared at the screen silently, completely unable to understand how any of this made sense anymore. In the world of Chrono Life, the most advanced virtual reality game dominating every metric from active users to total revenue, reaching the maximum level was considered practically impossible. It wasn't just hard, it was something players believed couldn't be done at all. Even Lee Song-hyuk, the legendary pro gamer known as Faker, had once stated in an interview that achieving level 999 anytime soon was unrealistic. He explained that even if the top players in the world, including himself, farmed monsters non-stop for 24 hours every day, it would still take decades to reach that level. Despite millions of players grinding day and night, no one had ever come close to reaching level 999, the so-called master level. And yet, Jiwoo stood there staring at his stats in complete confusion, unable to understand how he had reached that point. Urus, on the other hand, was practically celebrating, proudly declaring that his Hyungnim had become the first level master in the entire world. Jiwoo tried to make sense of it, remembering that he was only level 7 not too long ago, but when he thought about everything that happened, the results started to feel less random. On the very first day he obtained the stick, over 800,000 players were wiped out in a single attack. Along with that, countless monsters and entire dungeons were destroyed in the blast. Then there was the experience gained from defeating Urus, the strongest boss in Chrono Life, combined with the enemies from the highest level dungeon. After that came the complete annihilation of the 3 million players from the World Guild Alliance. And of course, the destruction of an entire planet added even more absurd experience to the total. All those events stacked together into something completely unprecedented, and that was how the world's first level master was born. Suddenly, a bright light appeared beneath Jiwoo's feet, illuminating everything around him as the system activated another sequence. It announced that since he had reached the maximum level, he would now be transferred to a transcendental space. In an instant, Jiwoo was teleported away, without any control over what was happening. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Sarang lay on the ground, staring at the sky, clearly bored out of her mind. She muttered that this was getting annoying, and wondered where that underwear-wearing idiot had disappeared to. She remembered he told her to wait for a bit, but now the sun had already set, and there was still no sign of him. Thinking about it further, she recalled that he had asked about the Halasan Guild, and that she was supposed to explain everything. Letting out a sigh, she dropped back onto the ground, and lazily declared that she would wait 1 more hour, acting like a generous master doing him a favor. Meanwhile, Jiwoo found himself standing in the center of a strange temple, floating on a piece of land in space. He looked around, completely confused, wondering where he had been dragged this time. It felt similar to when he met God and Diokbe, like he kept getting thrown into situations he didn't understand. Then suddenly, a powerful voice echoed through the space, welcoming him as a human child, and stating that they had met sooner than expected. The voice introduced itself as the Guide of Transcendence, the God of Class, praising Jiwoo for reaching the master level as a novice. According to the being, such an achievement was worthy of respect from everyone. Urus was immediately confused, asking how that was even possible, and whether Jiwoo had forgotten to change his class somewhere along the way. Jiwoo denied it, casually explaining that he used to aim to become a prosecutor, which didn't help clarify anything at all. At that moment, the system triggered a new process as the conditions were fulfilled, initiating a transition into a secret class. A brilliant light enveloped Jiwoo's body as several glowing spheres appeared before him. One by one, they took different shapes and rushed toward him. The first sphere transformed into a sword symbol and pierced into his body, followed by others representing different weapons like shields, bows, wands, gauntlets, spears, and more. Each one entered him, merging their power into his existence, until all weapon souls were absorbed. Jiwoo felt an overwhelming surge of power as the system announced that the class change was complete. He was now classified as a Master Class Novice, something that shouldn't even logically exist. As a bonus, all his previously distributed stat points were retrieved and then tripled. His status window updated instantly, resetting all attributes back to their base value of 5, while granting him 15,000 undistributed stat points. Urus stared at the numbers in complete disbelief, questioning how something like that was even possible. He pointed out that players normally gained only 5 points per level, yet Jiwoo had suddenly obtained 15,000 at once. Even if other max-level players existed, Jiwoo's raw stats would already be 3 times higher than theirs. To Urus, this was beyond broken, something that would go down as the greatest achievement in gaming history. Jiwoo, however, ignored the hype completely and focused on analyzing the stats calmly. Then a cold smile spread across his face as he began allocating all his points rapidly into a single attribute without hesitation. Urus panicked instantly, asking what the hell he was doing and warning him that wasting even one stat point would make him look like a complete loser. His panic only grew worse as he realized Jiwoo was dumping everything into just one stat instead of balancing them. Jiwoo finished distributing all the points and calmly stated that he didn't need anything else for now, as this was enough. Urus, completely losing it at this point, declared that he had just ruined everything and called him an absolute idiot for making such a reckless decision. At the Chronolife Company headquarters, an employee rushed into the president's office in a panic, warning that something had gone seriously wrong. Diokbae calmly asked what the issue was, but the employee insisted he needed to see it directly since it involved that particular user. Inside the control room, Diokbae stepped forward and asked what all the noise was about. His subordinate silently pointed toward the monitor, and the moment Diokbae saw it, he immediately understood. The stick kid had finally reached max level. The employee quickly clarified that the level itself wasn't the real problem. It was what Jiwoo was doing afterward. Diokbae asked what all the fuss was about and which stat he had chosen. When the employee pointed it out on the screen, the president paused for a moment, impressed. Then suddenly, he burst into laughter, clearly amused by the situation. He commented that Jiwoo truly loved the game and was enjoying it in his own unique way. The employee, however, wasn't laughing at all, arguing that this was serious and that Jiwoo was building a completely useless character. He warned that once Jiwoo realized how bad his build was, there was no telling how he might react. Diokbae dismissed the concern calmly, reminding him that a game company had no right to interfere with a player's choices. Even as the employee tried to push for some kind of intervention, Diokbae simply walked away, already losing interest in the argument. As he left, he thought to himself how absurd it was that Jiwoo had poured everything into a single stat and still achieved the Novice Master title. People were calling it a trash build with no future, but from his perspective, something entirely different had been created. In the entire history of virtual reality games, the worst and the strongest character had just been born at the same time. Back inside the game, Jiwoo finished allocating all his stats with a satisfied smile on his face. At that moment, the God of Classes appeared before him once again, declaring that this was the final stage of the guidance process. He explained that Jiwoo now had the right to choose one transcendental weapon from his arsenal. Jiwoo was immediately excited, thinking there was no way he would turn down something free like that. Looking at all the available weapons, he admitted they all looked incredible and took a moment to think. Then, without hesitation, he made his decision. He extended his hand and casually said he wanted all of them. For a second, the God of Classes didn't respond at all, almost like he was processing the absurd request. Then he firmly rejected it, stating that such greed could not be allowed and warning that excessive desire would only lead to ruin. He told Jiwoo to choose wisely. Jiwoo cut him off instantly, asking whether he would hand everything over peacefully or prefer to get beaten first. Urus, watching the exchange, was completely stunned, unable to believe what he was hearing. Even back in the control room, Diokbae removed his cigar in shock, thinking that this guy had officially lost his mind. The God of Classes didn't respond verbally, but a system notification appeared, stating that he was now furious. His entire demeanor changed, and the situation shifted into hostility as he prepared for combat. Jiwoo gripped his staff and calmly stated that he understood, interpreting it as the god asking for a fight. Without delay, the god launched an attack, sending a massive shield flying toward him at incredible speed. Jiwoo tried to block it, but the impact was overwhelming, smashing him straight into the ground. Urus shouted in panic, thinking Jiwoo was finished, while the God of Classes lamented that he never expected to personally kill a transcendent being. But before he could finish, Jiwoo retaliated with a blast from his staff that tore through half of the god's face. From the ground, Jiwoo casually remarked that the attack actually hurt, wondering if it was because his opponent was a god. His health bar had barely moved, thanks to his absurdly high constitution stat, which now sat at 15,000 points. That stat alone controlled his maximum health, recovery speed, and resistance to negative effects, making him nearly impossible to take down. Urus stood there completely dumbfounded, realizing just how insane Jiwoo's decision had been. He shouted that Jiwoo had made a fatal mistake by dumping everything into one stat, turning himself into a terrible character build. Jiwoo simply asked why, clearly not concerned at all. Urus explained that equipment in Chrono Life required a minimum strength stat to be used, meaning Jiwoo wouldn't be able to equip anything beyond his current stick. In short, he had locked himself into using that weak-looking weapon forever. Jiwoo responded calmly, saying that the stick was all he needed anyway. Right then, a system window appeared, revealing a hidden skill that had just been unlocked due to his current setup. Urus stared at it in confusion, asking what it was. The skill, called Healing Factor, converted all incoming damage into immediate recovery, instantly restoring his health to full. Jiwoo smirked and repeated Urus's earlier words about being a useless character, clearly mocking him. Urus, however, was too shocked to respond. The god of classes, now enraged and disfigured, roared and launched beams from his eyes. Jiwoo didn't even attempt to dodge, taking the attack head-on as his body was slammed into the ground again. Urus rushed toward him in panic, but Jiwoo suddenly started laughing. He exclaimed that Chrono Life was just too good, even as his body regenerated completely right in front of them. Urus could only think how disgusting that ability was, watching Jiwoo tank everything without consequence. The god continued attacking relentlessly, delivering blow after blow in a non-stop barrage. Each time, Jiwoo's health dropped momentarily before instantly returning to full, creating an endless cycle of damage and recovery. Jiwoo didn't even bother reacting anymore, simply standing there and laughing as the attacks kept coming. Finally, he said that was enough, and that he would end things now. He acknowledged that thanks to the god, he had gained quite a few benefits, but now it was time to collect everything and finish the fight. The god warned him that his greed would eventually consume him, and when that day came, he would face destruction. Jiwoo didn't care at all, and prepared his final move without hesitation. With a single upward slash, he struck the god of classes directly. The system immediately announced that the god of classes had ceased to exist. Reality itself began to crack and fragment, breaking apart into countless pieces as the transcendental space started collapsing. A final system notification appeared, stating that the space would be destroyed and that Jiwoo would be returned to his original world. Everything shrank rapidly until the entire space disappeared completely. Back in the normal world of Chrono Life, a beam of light suddenly struck the hill, bringing Jiwoo back down as all the weapons he obtained dropped around him. These weren't ordinary items, they were transcendent weapons of every type, and now every single one of them belonged to him. Moments later, they began to glow and vanished into a subspace, a storage dimension where they would respond whenever he called them. Jiwoo smiled to himself, clearly pleased, thinking this was going to be insanely useful going forward. Meanwhile, Sarang was standing there, completely irritated after being forced to wait for so long. She was already pissed, and no excuse was going to fix that. Suddenly, she heard a sound behind her, and Jiwoo casually appeared, placing his fingers on his forehead and greeting her like nothing happened. Before he could even finish, she punched him straight in the face and followed it up with a kick, yelling that she only agreed to wait a little while, not the entire night. Jiwoo quickly apologized, saying he thought he would be back sooner, but got delayed by some unexpected things, though at least he was here now. Sarang wasn't having it, and shouted that she was leaving, saying she was logging out of the game. Jiwoo simply asked where she was going, then casually waved goodbye when she answered. That reaction only made her more annoyed, but she held it in and warned him to log in tomorrow night at 7 p.m., which was when she finished work. If he was late again, she swore she would actually kill him next time. With that, she logged out, disappearing from the game. Jiwoo watched her go and commented that she really just did whatever she wanted. Urus then asked what he planned to do next, and Jiwoo stood up, saying he was logging out too since it was already past midnight in real life. The system prompted him for confirmation, and he accepted immediately. Back in the identity room, he stepped out of the capsule as the attendant thanked him and told him to visit again. Jiwoo stretched and yawned, thinking the day had been pretty great overall, and that Chrono Life was actually way more fun than he expected. As he walked out, his thoughts shifted toward money, wondering how much he could sell those transcendent weapons for. Since they were the first of their kind, they had to be worth a ridiculous amount. But then another thought hit him. What if they weren't tradable items at all, which would completely ruin his plans? That possibility alone made him uneasy. He passed by a small shop and briefly considered getting a bowl of gukbap, but after checking his empty wallet, he gave up immediately. Letting out a quiet sigh, he kept walking, feeling frustrated about being broke all the time. The game's monthly fee kept increasing, and he knew he would need to pick up more part-time shifts just to keep playing. Then suddenly, he stopped mid-step as something clicked in his mind. He remembered Urus mentioning that a single piece of high-end gear could cost around 10 million, and a full set could reach 100 million won. That realization sparked an idea instantly. If in-game items could be exchanged for real money, then he might have just found a way out of his situation. Without wasting another second, Jiwoo turned around and ran straight back toward the identity room, fully locked into his new plan. In Chronolife, there existed a place known only to top players, the intersection of life, the tomb of all mortals. It was the highest level hunting ground ever created, a place no one had successfully conquered, hidden for reasons unknown. That place was the Valley of the Undead, also known as Urus's domain, and now Jiwoo stood right in the middle of it. Urus, now dressed like a proper butler, welcomed him politely, but Jiwoo completely ignored the greeting and kept walking forward with a grin spreading across his face. He declared that he would be making full use of everything he had missed before, admitting that he had been too focused on revenge earlier to collect any items properly. Urus watched him and quietly thought that he almost felt sorry for what was about to happen to everything in that place. Suddenly, a massive surge of energy descended, and from the smoke, Urus's army appeared, surrounding Jiwoo from all directions. Instead of reacting with concern, Jiwoo simply smiled wider. At that moment, he realized something clearly. His miserable life was finally about to change. He was about to make an insane amount of money, and it would happen almost instantly. With a single swing of his stick, the entire Valley of Ghosts, the highest level hunting ground, was completely obliterated. The strongest monsters in that domain, including Turbot of Despair, Lapis of the Abyss, and Trish of the Dawn, were erased, just like everything else, leaving nothing behind. In just 2 attacks, every monster in the valley was wiped out, and valuable items began raining down everywhere. Urus commented that everything ended way too quickly, saying they had definitely profited well from that. But Jiwoo shook his head and said, this wasn't the end, it was just the beginning. Confused, Urus asked what he meant, and Jiwoo pointed toward the smoke, telling him to look carefully. The monsters had already started reappearing, respawning as if nothing had happened. This was a natural system in the game, where defeated monsters returned after a certain time, except for special beings like Urus himself. Jiwoo smirked and said that since this was his first time farming items properly, he planned to repeat this process at least 100 times. And just like that, another explosion echoed across the valley as he started again. In the past, there was an interesting lecture at Harvard where the speaker asked if everyone knew Bill Gates, the founder of Microsoft and one of the richest men in the world. He explained that even if Bill Gates saw $100 lying on the ground, he wouldn't bother picking it up because it would actually be a loss for him. It takes a few seconds to bend down, but in that same time, he earns far more, meaning he would lose money instead of gaining it. However, in the Valley of Ghosts, Jiwoo's situation was completely different, because the items piling up around him formed a massive mountain, and clearing 100 waves of monsters only took about an hour, including cooldown time. Yet the total value of everything dropped reached around 15 billion won, which completely flipped that logic. If Bill Gates earned roughly 500 million won per hour, then in that same time, a random part-time worker from South Korea had already surpassed the hourly income of the richest man alive without even trying that hard. The next day in Seoul, that same broke guy walked out of a Gucci store, while a saleswoman politely thanked him for his purchase, now dressed in an outfit worth over 3 million won, casually stepping into a life he couldn't even imagine before. He had already bought a luxury car and a bunch of expensive items, drawing attention from people on the street who stared in shock, some even saying it was their first time seeing a Lamborghini up close. Jiwoo casually removed his 2 million won sunglasses, sat inside his 400 million won Lamborghini, and told himself it was finally time to show off properly, only to floor the accelerator and crash straight into a lamppost within seconds. The moment of excitement turned into panic instantly as he stared in disbelief at the wreck, shouting about his expensive car like his soul just left his body. But just a few minutes later, he showed up again driving a brand new supercar, brushing it off like it didn't matter since he could just buy another one anyway. Meanwhile, back at the Chronolife company, Deokbae sat there lighting an expensive cigar while holding his head, clearly stressed out as he told the employee to continue the report. The man didn't sugarcoat anything and bluntly said the company was basically finished and they should probably start thinking about running away. Deokbae asked if there was any way to block Jiwoo's transactions, but the answer came immediately. It was already too late. Nothing could be done at this point. Before he could process that properly, his phone rang, and he answered while already annoyed, only to hear Jiwoo's voice on the other side casually asking how he was doing. Jiwoo joked that he was on his way to spend more money, and figured the chairman must understand that feeling, then went further by sarcastically offering help like he was doing charity. Deokbae completely lost it and started yelling, blaming him for everything that was happening, while Jiwoo acted clueless and hung up mid-conversation like it was nothing. After that, Jiwoo started wondering what else he could buy, since he had already picked up almost everything he wanted, yet something still felt missing, like he hadn't reached the true peak of this new life. Then suddenly, it hit him, and his eyes widened as he realized exactly what he had forgotten. Without wasting time, he got ready to drive again, thinking that this was the real highlight he had been missing all along. Soon after, inside an extremely luxurious building, Jiwoo stood in his brand new penthouse, laughing like a cartoon villain while proudly declaring that his place was top tier and that anyone was welcome to visit. For him, this was it, the ultimate moment, the peak of his success after everything he went through. But then he remembered something simple, the first thing you're supposed to do after moving into a new place. So he walked over to a neighboring apartment, holding a box of rice cakes as a gift, and rang the doorbell politely. A woman's voice from inside asked who it was, and Jiwoo responded that he was the new neighbor who had just moved in and wanted to greet them properly. After a short pause, the door slowly opened, and Jiwoo smiled, ready to introduce himself and say they should get along well. But the moment he saw her face, he froze completely. Standing right there was Sarang. Both of them stared at each other in silence, instantly recognizing one another from the game, as everything clicked in that single moment. And just like that, Jiwoo realized that this, not the money, not the penthouse, not the cars, was the real highlight of his day. Back in the game, inside the Valley of Ghosts, a lone figure slowly approached and stopped before the massive army of Urus, completely unfazed by their presence. Without saying a word, the being simply raised its hand, and in the next instant, the entire army was wiped out, their bodies bursting into blood as if they were nothing more than fragile insects. There was no struggle, no resistance, just absolute destruction delivered with chilling indifference. In response, the three strongest warriors of Urus's army appeared, stepping forward and calling the figure an arrogant human as they prepared to attack together. But the man didn't even bother reacting to their hostility, instead mocking them coldly by saying these idiots couldn't even recognize their own master anymore. As he spoke, three sharp spikes erupted from his back, channeling an overwhelming power that distorted the air around him. Before the warriors could even process what was happening, the spikes shot forward instantly, piercing through all three of them at once. Their bodies were torn apart and annihilated without a chance to fight back, completely erased in a single move. But it didn't end there, as the being began absorbing their remains like a parasite, draining everything from them, while the surrounding monsters panicked at the horrifying sight. He remained perfectly still as this happened, his expression completely cold, thinking that everything in this place deserved to perish. From that moment on, the three strongest warriors of Urus's army were gone for good, unable to respawn like normal monsters. A system notification appeared, announcing that their levels and stats had been completely absorbed and their data erased entirely. The creature stood there silently, staring at what remained, recalling the moment when Urus lost his first head, clenching his teeth at the memory. When Urus had entered his soul form, there had always been one lingering question about where the other head had gone. Now, the answer stood right there. The being revealed its identity, no longer hiding what it truly was. It was the lost head of Urus itself, a separate existence created to bring destruction upon humanity. Its name was Huracan,